All right, so this session is You Belong Here, How Inclusive Representation Impacts the Health and Safety of LGBTQ plus youth. And here today we have Breanna Culler, who is the Suicide Prevention Coordinator at ECU Health Medical Center, and Zachary Pomeroy, who is a filmmaker who is involved in some documentary filmmaking with Breanna.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Devin. All right. Zach, do you want to go to the next slide?
Yeah.
Cool.
And folks, I forgot to mention this. We're going to save questions until the end. So just feel free to submit them in the chat, but we won't read them until they're done with the presentation.
Awesome. All right, well, welcome everybody. Thank y'all so much for hopping on here this afternoon. So my name is Breanna Culler. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm the Suicide Prevention Coordinator at ECU Health. And I'm also a Rural Youth Empowerment Fellow with Equality NC. And I was the producer of the You Belong Here documentary, which we're going to talk about a little bit as we go through the presentation. Zach, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I am Zach Pomeroy, pronouns he, him, his. I'm the owner of La Flecha Film Company, which was the director of the You Belong Here documentary. And I'm currently living in Wilmington, North Carolina. When we were working on this, I was in Greenville, North Carolina.
Awesome. Yeah, just to tell y'all a little bit of background kind of about both of us and also about the You Belong Here project. So we are both from Pitt County. And we both grew up in Pitt County, and You Belong Here was a documentary film that we did through the Comprehensive Suicide Prevention Grant through the Department of North Carolina Health and Human Performance. And in the Comprehensive Suicide Prevention Grant, we were trying to promote suicide prevention across the state, as well as specifically in Pitt County, but with a particular focus on LGBTQ plus youth. So we kind of set out to create something that we felt was going to be impactful for our community, and that is the You Belong Here documentary, as well as the other aspects of the campaign. So just to give you a little bit of background on kind of what You Belong Here was. All right, so today, which I'm sure you've probably already got an idea based on the title and a little bit about what we've been talking about. Today we're going to be talking a lot about LGBTQ plus youth, as well as suicide rates and suicide prevention. So we're going to go through some LGBTQ plus specific suicide data, and then we're going to talk about some of the ways that you all can help to kind of try to keep your own community safe and protect your communities from suicide. So before we really get into all of the data aspects, I always think it's just really important that we kind of go briefly through defining LGBTQ+. So LGBTQ+ is an acronym that's often used as an umbrella term for all folks who have a non-normative gender or sexuality. So we know that L is for lesbian, which is folks who identify as women who are attracted to other folks who identify as women. G is for gay, which is also something that's seen as kind of an umbrella term, but historically has been used for men who are attracted to other men. B is for bisexual, T for transgender, and then Q is for queer or questioning. I think with the Q, it's always really important to note that how Q is used, whether it's referred to as for queer or for questioning, is really dependent upon the audience you're speaking to. A lot of folks do attribute it to questioning. However, a lot of folks who identify in the community may use the term queer, and I feel like queer is something that for younger generations has really moved towards being another kind of umbrella term. However, it does have a historically negative connotation, so always just want to kind of recognize that and let people know that while you might hear some folks say queer, other folks might be offended by it. And then the plus represents all the other identities that exist within the LGBTQ plus kind of umbrella. And then intersectionality. So intersectionality is acknowledging the relationships between people and the social categories that they may fall into. I think it's always really important anytime I do a presentation about these topics to really make sure that we are uplifting intersectionality and trying to put that at the front and center. Because, while obviously we'll be talking specifically about the LGBTQ plus community, there are so many intersections that the folks within that community may exist at. So it's important to note that every single aspect of someone's identity, whether that's their ethnicity, gender, sexuality, religion, their class, whatever it may be, all of those ultimately are going to play into how they interact with society and how society interacts with them as well. So why address this population? This is where we're really going to dive deeper into some of the data points that I was talking about previously. And I believe there's also a clip to show from the documentary.
Yeah, and I'm going to stop sharing the screen really fast and pull up the clip and I'll reshare it. So this clip comes from a piece of the documentary that we wanted to share with you guys, and I'm sharing my screen again now. Breanna, can you see that okay?
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. And this is about a 3-minute clip from the documentary.
When I came out, obviously it was a mess. There was a lot of screaming, a lot of yelling, and crying and such things. And I remember one moment, my mom, she was yelling at me. She basically tried to threaten to take away my contact with my brother. At the end of it, I went back to my grandmother's house and I went to my room in the house and I was just crying that night, thinking like, I just don't want my family to hate me.
And my dad had me over and we got into this 3-hour-long conversation. And pretty much he was like, I would never respect their marriage in any way. It would be like a joke to me. Then told me that he would kill himself if that meant they would stop being gay.
I got physically beat when I was in middle school. They would call me slurs. They would knock me onto the ground.
There were a group of guys who I knew quite well throwing rocks and bottles at my car, and they're like, "Get out of our neighborhood, faggot. Get out the car, Barry."
There was no good perception of gay people, especially in rural part of Pitt County. And if you knew a gay person, they could be talented or great or the smartest person in the world, but they're always going to be gay.
I want everyone to be kind, but not everyone's kind. And as a mother, you hate that for your child. You hate to think that people are going to judge them or be mean to them just because of who they love or how they show their love. And it's scary sometimes to think that people can be that cruel to your children.
So I'm Black, Asian, a woman, and I'm bisexual, and that is scary. It's very scary. And being faced with a lot of intersectionality, it's really easy to kind of feel like, man, where do I belong? And that's been a huge struggle for me, is finding a community that I belong in. I've been told that I'm not Black enough. I've been told I'm not Asian enough. And I've been told, well, you're married, so it doesn't matter that you're bisexual. And that hurts. It's this voice is constantly telling me that you're not enough.
And it can be scary. I mean, it can be scary that students may not feel comfortable walking down 10th Street in Greenville because of epithets yelled at them out of passing cars or trucks. The other day, literally just here in Greenville, someone yelled the F slur out of their car as I was going into a restaurant. I wish that it, would be better for everyone. People would be more accepting, but I realize that that's not reality.
Thank you, Zach. And are you pulling the PowerPoint back up?
Yeah.
Sweet. And just to give you all a little bit of background information, so all of the voices that were shared in the documentary, as well as the folks that y'all just saw in that clip, were voices that came from folks who either currently live in Pitt County or who grew up in Pitt County, or just grew up in other like rural areas of North Carolina. So we really tried our best to make sure that we were uplifting the voices from our state, as well as voices not only that are from our state, but from the more rural areas of our state as well. And then do you want to go to the next slide? Sweet. All right, so kind of jumping off of that video, I think it's really important before we look at the data to talk a little bit about some of the bigger kind of social issues that are at play that ultimately are influencing the data points that we're going to talk about here in a minute. So we know based on the stories of people with lived experience, based on data, and also just honestly by using some kind of critical thinking skills, that LGBTQ plus individuals have been historically mistreated, they've been stigmatized, and are frequently exposed to external trauma that is going to inevitably impact the level of internal trauma that these individuals are dealing with. So just kind of to give you an idea of this, as you can see on the slide, I've kind of listed out some of these external traumas that I'm going to go through briefly. So first and foremost, I think there's sort of this idea of heteronormativity, which is simply the idea that everyone is cis and everyone is heterosexual and straight. And obviously we are beginning to address this in a lot of different spaces. However, there is still this heteronormativity aspect that ultimately is going to lead to the kind of ignoring LGBTQ plus identities in most spaces. And then that heteronormativity is what plays into social stigma. And that is really just what we see on a social level of there's being a negative connotation of LGBTQ identity and LGBTQ plus experiences. And I think we see this on a day-to-day basis, even with kids on a playground of, someone using gay as a term to like making fun of another kid. And while yes, that might seem innocent in the moment, I think it really does speak to the greater social environment that has led to a child thinking that calling another kid gay is something that's going to hurt their feelings or is going to belittle them in some way. And then ultimately that social stigma is what's going to influence political barriers. I know we're seeing some of that on a state level right now. But even on a like wider level, we can talk about like the don't ask, don't tell policies. We can talk about how long it took to have marriage equality passed. And all of these political barriers are ultimately going to make it easier for folks kind of on the ground living the day-to-day life of an LGBTQ plus person in their community. It's going to make it a lot easier for them to experience discrimination, abuse, or harassment within their community whenever policy backs that. And then there's also the aspect of historical mistreatment. So first of all, having an LGBTQ identity of any kind for generations in this country was something that was considered a crime. So folks could be put in jail for that. And also I think it's important to note too that being LGBTQ plus was something that up until 1973 was actually considered a mental illness by the American Psychiatric Association. So it was a diagnosable mental illness that could ultimately get you institutionalized. And while all of these things are happening on kind of a greater social scale, they ultimately are going to feed into the level of internal trauma that LGBTQ plus folks are having to deal with. So being more distrustful of medical providers and of police and of systems of power that we assume are supposed to protect us, when there's this historical mistreatment and also these political barriers that are constantly being pushed, that is going to lead to LGBTQ plus folks feeling like not only am I not protected in my own community, but I'm not protected on a broader scale either. And then also just a sustained stress and anxiety of being othered, of being discriminated against, of being abused in any way. And ultimately, this all is going to feed into this kind of idea of having internalized homophobia and feeling shame around your identity. And ultimately, we see these greater social issues play out in any suicide risk data or suicide data. So for one, we know that LGBTQ plus youth are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than their heterosexual peers. We also know that 45% of LGBTQ plus youth seriously considered attempting suicide in the past year. And I think like this right here is a really important piece of why I think this intersectionality piece is so important to recognize. Youth of color are reporting higher rates than their white peers. So when we talk about suicide or suicide risk data, it's not only that we're seeing LGBTQ plus kids overrepresented in that data, but we're also seeing LGBTQ plus kids who are also people of color being even further disproportionately represented in this data. And I think it's also really important, that last data point, that we recognize that ultimately the data we're seeing on the youth side isn't going away the minute these kids turn 18, you know. In fact, it's actually something that continues to be perpetuated, and there continues to be an issue with, LGBTQ plus adults being overrepresented in suicide data and suicide risk data. And Devin, I just got your message about the audio. I think I can. Give me 1 second. And Zach, did you have anything to add for this slide at all?
You did a great job of covering it. I can take on the next slide while you're working on the audio. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, that'll be good.
Okay. So next slide, one of the components that we worked on as part of the documentary, at the very beginning of the documentary, we worked on, and we're going to explain this a little bit more, but we took some of the data that we saw represented from the national level, and then we started putting it together for what it looks like in the South. And when we're looking at the South, nearly half of the LGBTQ plus population in the South reported feeling that their community was somewhat or very unaccepting of the LGBTQ plus identities. And we noticed that going back to youth in the South, they reported less access to affirming spaces. So when youth were not able to have the affirming spaces, they were not able to really explore their identity in a safe place. And 44% of the LGBTQ plus people in the South reported seriously considering suicide. And while 16% of the LGBTQ plus population in the South attempted suicide in the past year. And the South also tends to have more farmland and agriculture, which inevitably leads to more communities being established in these rural areas. And you're seeing a lot of the youth not able to have affirming spaces in this spot because it's not seen as a priority in these places.
Sweet.
Anything you want to add to that, Breanna?
No, I think you're good. Can you hear me? Is the
Mhm.
audio any better now?
Yep.
Okay.
What was this? What was the issue with the audio? I didn't read it.
I think it wasn't like loud enough.
Okay.
All right, so, okay, sweet, thank you. All right, so then going even further and looking a little bit more just solely at our state, and also just to let everyone know, so all of the data that we just referenced previously, it does come from the Trevor Project's National Survey on LGBTQ plus youth mental health, and those numbers are from 2021, I believe, and that was the most recent report. Now, these numbers that I'm getting ready to cover in these slides are from the Trevor Project, but they're 2022 numbers. So when we talk about North Carolina LGBTQ plus youth data, I think it's really important that we recognize that the data that was shared on the previous slide, as well as the data that was shared for the national suicide data, that really we're seeing a lot of these numbers just in our state either mirror or exceed. So I know for the national data, for example, it was 45% of LGBTQ plus youth were seriously considering suicide in the past year. And in North Carolina, we're seeing 46% seriously considering suicide in the past year. And then also, when we look down here at this chart, I really just think this gives us a really good visual to kind of compare what we're seeing when we talk about reporting feelings of seriously considering suicide or making a plan to attempt suicide or actually attempting suicide, comparing that between heterosexual youth and then into any youth that identify as gay, lesbian, or bisexual. And this chart actually comes from the North Carolina Youth Reporting, Youth Risk Behavior Survey data from the 2018 to 2019 school year, which was the most recent time that this report was collected. And again, just want to point out the pretty notable difference going on here when we talk about reporting suicide in any capacity between heterosexual youth to gay, lesbian, or bisexual youth. And then, all right, so going off of that data, I think we really just have to, going off of that data, we really want to start looking at what are ways that we can address this. Obviously, we can see that LGBTQ plus youth on a national scale, a regional scale, and within our own state are seriously considering making plans or are attempting suicide at significantly higher rates. And I think the next part of this conversation has to be, what can we do? And I think Zach has another clip to pull up from the documentary, and then we'll get back into it.
One second, I'm pulling it up, right? Yeah. Can everybody see the documentary okay?
It's been pretty well documented, especially for youth, especially in that under 18 demographic, right? That one person can make a difference. For a young person identifying within the LGBTQ community, the isolation and the loneliness can be very intense. And finding one person in their life, a teacher, a counselor, someone in their church, their synagogue, their temple, one person that says, I see you, I love you, I affirm you, and you are good and whole, can be the critical difference.
Saying that you love someone who is gay is not going to make a straight kid gay. It's going to make the life of your gay kid though. It's going to make that they may be able to breathe more than they could before.
Having a sense of safety and a place that you can go to feel that all of you is welcomed and loved and supported. That is important for any of us, but especially folks who are developmentally still learning who they are and still exploring their identity, formulating their beliefs about the world. And is the world a safe place? Are there people in the world that will be able to grow up and trust? So identifying yourself as one of those people lets them know the world, there may be big, scary parts of it. There are also pockets of support.
Sweet. Thank you, Zach. All right, so as y'all just heard, I know y'all just saw a little bit of the data that we're going to be talking about here in a minute, but reducing the risk of LGBTQ plus youth suicide is really a twofold process, and we're going to talk about kind of the individual influence piece first, and then kind of get into the communal change piece. You want to go to the next slide? Sweet. So again, which I know this data point was shared in the documentary, but we do know, based on the Trevor Project's Accepting Adults Reduce Suicide Attempts Among LGBTQ plus Youth report from 2019, that having at least one accepting and affirming adult in the lives of LGBTQ plus youth can reduce the risk of suicide by 40%. And I also just want to point out that in that same report, for LGBTQ plus youth, having access to at least one LGBTQ plus affirming space reduces their risk of suicide by 35%. And I think obviously reducing the risk of suicide by 40% and 35% is pretty substantial, and it's obviously something that we definitely want. We want to promote and let people know, But I also think it's really important that we point out for both of these data points, when we talk about one LGBTQ affirming space and one accepting adult, it's not said there's no kind of specific idea of what the one has to be. So for the one accepting adult, obviously we would love for it to be the child's parents. However, it doesn't have to be. The one truly can be a pastor, a teacher, a librarian, a janitor, anyone, just anyone that's willing to accept and affirm these kids for who they say they are and where they are. And then when we talk about the space, obviously it would be great if every community had a dedicated LGBTQ plus center, or if every university had the means to have a dedicated LGBTQ plus center. But unfortunately, that's not going to be a reality for all communities. So when we talk about having at least one LGBTQ plus affirming space, that truly can be a section of books at a library that provide LGBTQ plus stories and have diverse perspectives. It can be as simple as an office that has LGBTQ plus an LGBTQ plus pride up, or even a local business. So when we talk about the adult or the one space, I just really want to hone in on that, that it's not anything specific. All right, so when we look to apply this data, I think it's really important that we talk about how libraries can be an accessible, safe space for all members of the community, and especially for those that are underrepresented or overlooked within the broader social context. So I feel like the first step is we kind of have to talk about what's a safe space. And ultimately what's going to make a safe space is that the space would be welcoming and affirming of all identities. It would be culturally competent, trauma informed, and would also be inclusive. Are y'all having issues with the audio? I just got a message about it. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Okay, sweet. Thank you. Okay, awesome. Thank y'all so much. All right, so ultimately what's going to make a safe space is that a welcome and affirm of all identities, it would be culturally competent, would be trauma informed, and would also be inclusive. And then do you want to go to the next slide, Zach? And when we talk about safe libraries, I think it's important that we also recognize that libraries, to a certain extent, since they are they are so easily accessible and are also a pillar of many communities, that a library has to go beyond the aforementioned definition of a safe space. So a safe library will also offer folks the freedom to be themselves. They will acknowledge and celebrate diversity. It will also make an effort to protect patrons' physical and emotional safety, and also will be dedicated to upholding patrons' privacy. All right, so how do we get there? So hopefully this next little bit is going to be some kind of on the ground here, hands-on ways that we can apply these practices. So first, it's kind of study the blueprints. So this is just a quote I always like to include. It's, you can't change a law and expect to change a culture. You have to change the culture well before the law is placed on the table. And I think this really does a good job of speaking to that's kind of the same concept I was talking about earlier, of it being a twofold process when we look at reducing risk of suicide. So we have to have that individual influence, and we have to have folks on the ground who are willing to recognize a problem and want to be the change and want to try and fix the problem, and be a part of ultimately influencing the communal change aspect. I feel like a lot of times there's this idea of a top-down approach when it comes to social issues, but I know when we look at any historical social progress movement, it's always started with an individual or a group of folks who are willing to kind of step up and continue to fight and push for the progress. And that's ultimately what leads to the policies that help to protect communities.
Breanna, move your mic away from your mouth just a little bit.
Okay, is it good now?
Can you move the mic away from your mouth a little bit?
Yeah. Is it good? There?
Yeah, that's better. That'll be good. We'll try that.
Okay, cool. Full transparency, it's like I just got this headset. Okay, I just got this headset. So I'm like trying to figure out how to use it. anyway, going on. Okay, sweet. Thank you. But anyways, so now we can talk about a little bit more of the foundational work, and this would be some of that individual work that folks can do. So first, I think it's really important that we recognize the power. You recognize the power of your position and the influence it has. So obviously, again, going back to that reducing risk data, you can be that one adult, and you can create that one space that LGBTQ plus youth and the LGBTQ plus community in general is in need of. So I really would encourage all of you to lean into that and recognize that, but also recognize that, as an educated professional, you are an influential person in your community. You're an influential adult. And not only that, but you are influencing the level of resources that are available in your community, as well as how accessible those resources are. So I really would encourage you all to just recognize that power and the influence. But also, we have to get comfortable with kind of talking about uncomfortable topics. So obviously, in North Carolina, LGBTQ plus issues of any kind are pretty controversial right now. I think we could all agree that it's a hot topic issue, and it's one that people aren't really comfortable talking about. But unfortunately, we have to get, not unfortunately, but ultimately we have to be comfortable talking about things that make us uncomfortable, because these things are still happening, these issues are still existing in our communities, and ultimately it's hurting folks in our communities. So that's kind of the first thing. We have to get comfortable talking about it and being willing to lean into these conversations rather than leaning away from them. And then also leaning into public allyship. So making sure that when you introduce yourself, you're sharing your pronouns, or wearing a ally pin, or being willing to put up a mini LGBTQ plus pride flag in your office are very simple ways that you can make it known that you're an ally. And ultimately, I know that those sound like very easy, very small things, but I know, speaking, and Zach, I'm going to speak for you too, but speaking as members of the LGBTQ plus community ourselves, I know that's something that I always look for. Anytime I'm talking with somebody, or if I go into a new space, I'm looking for some kind of signal to let me know that, hey, this is a safe space, and this is an ally that I'm interacting with. Also just pursuing education. So making sure that you are looking for resources, and looking for media, whether it's books, movies, whatever it may be, that center diverse voices or are by diverse voices, and offer a new perspective. So pursuing education is going to be kind of a twofold sort of thing, in the sense of not only is it beneficial for you, and is going to ultimately allow you to grow as a person, but it's also going to be beneficial when we get into the next slide of talking about how we can kind of move this allyship forward on an organizational level. So making sure that you're knowledgeable and you know the resources and you are listening to the stories of people with lived experience. And then also just showing up, making sure that you are doing what you can to show up for the LGBTQ plus community within your community is another really, really key thing of letting folks know that, hey, I'm an ally, and hey, I'm willing to come here and be in a new space with diverse perspectives. And building blocks. All right, so this is kind of moving from ally to advocate. And when we talk about ally, ultimately ally and advocate are kind of the same thing. However, I really think it's just important that with this slide, we recognize that some of the things we talked about previously were a little bit more on the individual level. So, educating yourself, making sure that you yourself are putting out that you're letting people know that you're an ally publicly. But with this stuff, it's more about kind of getting your hands dirty a little bit. So being willing to speak up about your being willing to speak up about your allyship, being willing to do what you can in your sphere of influence to promote diversity, and also being willing to be a shield. So I think when we talk about a safe space, when we talk about a safe adult, that space or adult also has to be willing to put up guidelines of, hey, this is what will be and will not be tolerated in this space. Because ultimately, we want to make sure that when diverse folks are in our environment or are around us, that they know that they are protected, and that things like bullying or hate speech or discrimination aren't going to be tolerated. And I think that's a really, really important piece that might seem somewhat simple, but I know, speaking again as a member of the LGBTQ plus community, there's a difference in saying that you support me professionally, or you align with me or you support me personally, and then being willing to be upfront and step in front and kind of be that protection in situations where someone is being discriminatory or is attempting to be rude in some way because of my LGBTQ identity. So I think that's a really key piece of being an advocate. But also, again, being willing to promote diversity within your sphere of influence, whether that be letting other staff members that you work with, or even just community folks know about upcoming LGBTQ safe zone trainings or anti-racism trainings, or letting people know about different resources that center diverse voices and diverse experiences. And also being willing to speak up about these issues. So I think when we talk about allyship and advocacy, we have to be willing to speak up, but then we also have to be willing to a certain degree, pass the mic. We have to recognize that, hey, as allies, we are here. Our role is to support and affirm and speak up about these issues and be the ones who are kind of working to advance diversity and inclusion and advance allyship education. But also, there has to be space for folks with lived experience to pick up the mic and share their experience. And ultimately, we need to be amplifying those voices rather than speaking over them. All right, and then the completed layout. So we've discussed the individual work, and we've discussed taking on active allyship within our realm of influence. Now we can start to look at these foundational practices and how these foundational practices can ultimately lead to organizational change, and then how this organizational change can lead to communal change. So ultimately, by engaging in active allyship and inviting and including diverse perspectives and using our influence to uplift both allyship and diversity, this will influence kind of peer-to-peer change, but also will hopefully influence organizational change. So on an organizational level, a safe library would have staff members that are trained in LGBTQ plus allyship, anti-racism, and trauma. We would have protective rules and regulations. And when I talk about this piece, I'm really talking again, going back to that being a shield piece of having some sort of upfront, even if it's just displayed in the library of, hey, we're not going, discrimination, hate speech, bullying won't be tolerated. Having that kind of those policies up front and center are what's ultimately going to help people feel safe within the space, but it's also going to make it 10 times easier for you as a staff member to be like, hey, this isn't tolerated here. And you'll have the policy to back you up to support whatever you have to do next, whether that be separating folks or letting someone know that they have to leave, whatever it might look like. We would also have diverse representation, and this could be on the shelves, in marketing, in programs, and also within the organization. Would have inclusive practices and staff training, and also have leadership that supports these practices, and improved accessibility that will allow for any and every member of the community to be present, represented, and safe in the space. Obviously, this is the ideal, and it's a long process to get here. So I don't want folks to think that you have to have every single one of these to be an ally or to create a safe library or a safe space in any way. It's really all about doing what you can where you can, but I think it's important that we note these organizational shifts because it not only speaks to the power of individual influence, but it also allows us to start wrapping our head around how having these spaces can ultimately help to influence communal change and help keep our community safe and inclusive. All right, and then Zach, do you want to take this?
Yeah, absolutely. So taking that framework that Breanna just shared, and putting You Belong Here, the documentary, into it, we just kind of wanted to walk you through the timeline of what it looked like to bring the documentary and this project in particular together. And so Sue Ann, it began with Sue Ann Pilgreen as the individual influence. She, a lot of times I explain to people that when you're sitting around a table, it's hard for the people who are on the outside of the table to have a seat at that table. And so a lot of times communities that are marginalized rely on allies, and that's why it's so important. That individual influence is so important, so that the individual who is sitting at the table that is pushing people away from the table gives them a space to begin having those conversations. And so Sue Ann Pilgreen was the start of that conversation as a public ally in her work world. And she began studying the issue and saw a lot of the things that were going on with the suicide and mental health issues in the LGBTQ plus population specifically. And then she was able to secure funding through a grant at the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, the Comprehensive Suicide Prevention Grant. And she confronted a lot of controversy. And that's the hard part, is there's a lot of times going to be controversy that comes up from these conversations that are being had. And a lot of times that's where allyship really comes in, is being that almost fence to protect from the controversy that's going on. And then the most important piece that Breanna covered a little bit early is speaking up, but then you pass the mic to people who are able to form the story in their own voice. And that's where Breanna, me, and our colleague Denise came in. And she brought us all to the table and started to have conversations around what can we do to help, like, this is the issue here. What can we do to bring change in this area? And so we really did some community specific research, which I mentioned earlier. And we sat down and brainstormed, okay, what message do we want to portray to the public, and how do we want to capture this? Like, what is the type of collateral that we want to use? And that really came from the research, which is a huge component of this project, because we were able to sit down with people in our community, specifically LGBTQ plus people in our community and stakeholders in our community, and really get their input, which helped form the project. And then we were able to amplify lived experiences, because one of the reasons that we thought a documentary was so impactful was because me as a gay male growing up in Pitt County, I didn't have positive representation of what it was like to be gay. So I lived in the closet throughout that whole time that I was in Greenville, North Carolina. And so we thought it was really important that we needed to share stories that amplified the lived experience. And then we worked on some marketing techniques to get this out to the public. And there's continued development and continued research that's going on from this. And that organizational change shifted when it gave LGBTQ plus people visibility, and specifically in ECU Health Medical Center. And Breanna can speak a little bit more on this, what that organizational change looked like at ECU Health.
Yeah, so some of the organizational change that we kind of saw within ECU Health were that some of the work Sue Ann did, as well as some of the work that we did, and what Zach was just talking about, ultimately led to there being an increased interest in LGBTQ plus visibility. And a lot of that has actually been kind of headed up by our DEI department here at ECU Health. And that's as simple as now they have like LGBTQ staff, like kind of group get together things, which is something that before it was available, but it was not widely publicized in any way. So even a shift as simple as that was something that I feel like has made a big change as someone working within the organization. There's also been opportunities to do some staff trainings, and we've done those in tandem with the documentary. So we've showed the documentary, and then we've been able to bring in folks from ECU to do safe zone trainings. ECU Health has also put out a public statements, and also obviously put their logo on the documentary. So they've been a little bit more willing to say, hey, we support this work, and we are here as a medical hospital to provide healthcare for all members of our community, including LGBTQ plus folks. And then also there's been the ongoing support aspect too. And I think ultimately, since ECU Health is such an influential organization in our community, that has ultimately fed into some communal change. So in Pitt County, there's definitely been an increased interest in LGBTQ plus allyship and LGBTQ plus inclusion. Some very simple ways that I can note for that, as we're actually working right now with a local pastor who was in that clip y'all saw. We're working with her and a professor over at ECU to start a support group for parents of LGBTQ plus kids, and eventually we want to start one for LGBTQ plus kids as well. And there's also been definitely an increase in interest when it comes to our local businesses. So the City of Greenville Visitors Bureau is working right now with the DEI board here at the hospital to try and create some sort of trainings for business owners, just to help not only make sure that our community is inclusive and safe for folks, but also to make sure that as a city, Greenville is a place that is inclusive and people want to come to. And also, I think it's important that I feel like we have to give credit to ultimately the community being more interested in the work, and the community being like stepping up a little bit more to these conversations within the past year, is what has allowed us to get connected to folks at all these places that are listed down below the blue arrow. Those are just some of the places we've been able to take the documentary and take some of these stories. And ultimately, none of that would have been possible without the folks who agreed to be in the documentary and share their story. And it wouldn't be possible without our own community being willing to back us and say, hey, we really like this, and we want to help you promote it in some way. All right, so I know we talked a lot about community in the last slide, but I just think it's really important that when we talk about allyship, when we talk about trying to create more inclusive spaces, that ultimately North Carolina is huge and every community is going to be different. And because every community is going to be different, every community is going to have a different culture, every community is going to have a different need. And ultimately, what's going to work in one community might not work in another community. So I know for us, for example, Greenville's in Pitt County. I know when people hear Greenville, they think ECU. But you know, Pitt County is a pretty rural county outside of Greenville. And there is a lot of kind of conservative ideology within Pitt County. So I know as folks who grew up here in Pitt County, I think me and Zach can both speak to this, that ultimately, you know, we couldn't really push LGBTQ inclusion and allyship for the sake of pushing inclusion and allyship as just important on their own. We had to be very strategic in making sure that our message was something that wasn't going to be seen as political, and making sure that it was going to be something that ultimately we could always bring back to safety, and also making sure that we shared it and we shared it in a way and make sure the method of sharing the message was going to be something that the community would respond to. So these are just a couple of the questions that we tried to consider as we were putting the documentary together and putting the rest of the campaign together. And ultimately, these are not the end all be all. The list can definitely go on, but these are just a few of the key questions that we asked. So we wanted to figure out what was our message or goal, which obviously our message was to let people know about the LGBTQ plus suicide risk, and also let them know how important it was to be an ally. And our goal was to keep kids safe and keep folks safe in our community. And ultimately it was important because we wanted to keep people safe. And again, kind of going back to that culture piece, we knew that we needed to make sure that we were doing what we could to play to the values of our community. And I feel like that's something that you can definitely see within the documentary. Like, Pitt County is a space where there are churches every half mile. Zach, would you agree? Like literally every half mile. So we wanted to make sure, like, we felt like having a pastoral voice was something that we knew was going to go a long way with folks. And we also knew that having people who lived in Pitt County and not just centering voices from New York or Florida or Montana, while those voices and those experiences are great, ultimately the folks here need to see folks here and know that, hey, these are your neighbors and we need to be talking about these issues because we need to care about our neighbors. But yeah, so I think we really just want to make sure that we recognize that every community is different and ultimately we don't know what the culture of your community is or what the needs of your community may be. So we'd really encourage you to lean into those community questions on your own as well. All right, and then this is just about kind of the impact of those community considerations. So leaning into our community, and I would encourage you all to do this as well, because we truly believe that asking these questions and analyzing your community is what's going to give you the foresight to kind of figure out, okay, what are things that are going to be seen as controversial, and what are strategic ways that I can kind of navigate around it. And it's also going to give you an opportunity to gather the support you're going to need to continue to do this work. And navigating challenges, just these are a couple that, again, I know this is a hot topic issue right now, so we also want to be sure to give you just a couple things that were helpful for us, and hopefully they'll be helpful for you as well. So bringing it back to center for us, that was about safety, and I think that's something that's going to work near about everywhere. At the end of the day, most people want to keep their neighbors safe. They want to keep their community safe. So if you can be sure to always try, and whether you're trying to promote providing furthered representation in the library, if you're trying to provide some sort of inclusive programming, whatever it may be, making sure that you are bringing it back to, hey, this is not a political statement. This is not pushing some agenda. This is about safety, because there's plenty of data to support that diversity and inclusion are ultimately going to positively impact people's health and safety within their communities. So evidence gets attention, emotion holds attention. For us, that I think is another thing that we definitely tried to incorporate in the entirety of the campaign. So especially for topics that are considered more hot button topics, evidence is what's going to get the attention. Evidence is what's going to ultimately kind of open the door for people to even be willing to have the conversation. However, that emotion is what's going to hold the attention. So having folks with lived experience on the ground who are willing to speak to those data points and humanize that data is what's going to allow people to have a connection to, like, oh, this is actually happening in my community. This is real. And I think evidence is what gets people concerned, but playing into that emotional side of things is what's going to ultimately change people's minds and challenge their preconceived perceptions of diverse populations. So check your privilege versus checking out your privilege. That I think is something that, a lot of times we talk about people need to checking your privilege. And while, yes, I think that's an important aspect, I think checking out your privilege, or checking out folks' privilege, is something that as allies is really important. And especially when we talk about trying to work within an organization or trying to do some of this work to help shift our communities, we have to recognize folks' privilege that are working alongside us in the same fight. So unfortunately, we know that, people judge folks based off of their appearance, based off of their level of experience, based on what their background is, and that for certain audiences, a certain level of education or experience is what is going to allow the audience to actually listen to you. So I know for us, having Sue-Ann Pilgreen, who has been working at the hospital for years, and is an older white woman who has a lot of experience on the medical side of things as well as on the public health side of things. And since she's been working here so long, she's well respected here. Having her be the one to go to bat for us is what got folks listening and being willing to even talk about this and being willing to support the work. So I would definitely encourage y'all to just lean into that, being strategic, and then doing what you can where you can. Ultimately, resistance and progress are always going to go hand in hand. So there's always going to be people who don't agree or are going to want to challenge what you're doing, or going to want to challenge what you're saying. And yes, that can be very scary, but I think it's also important that we recognize that, again, we can't do everything for everybody, but we can do something in our realm of influence. And then lastly, protect your team. So just making sure that it's not always just one individual front and center. One individual is really, really easy to target and to ultimately be the center. One individual is ultimately easy to make the center of controversy, but having a team makes it a little bit easier. And lastly, these are just a couple points we want to kind of leave y'all with. Change takes time. It takes a long time. Ultimately, none of this stuff is going to be an overnight change. Communities don't change overnight. Organizations don't change overnight. And even that individual work, it takes time, and it's okay for it to take time. It's really just a day-to-day trying to do what you can where you can. The comparison only helps your opponents, not your teammates. So again, every community is going to be unique, and what's going on in a different part of the state might not be what can happen where you are right now, and that's okay. And then you can't pour from an empty cup. So this work is hard, and trying to be an ally and trying to fight for change within your organization or your community can be extremely exhausting. So make sure that you're taking care of yourself as well. And this is just a couple online resources, as well as some information about North Carolina-based LGBTQ+ organizations. So if y'all want any further information, I would definitely encourage y'all to check those out, or feel free to reach out. That's my email as well as